My father's voice cut through the backyard before the applause had even faded. That money was for her tuition. Forks froze midair. The soft hum of the rented speakers crackled in the sudden silence. Someone's champagne glass tipped, spilling onto the white tablecloth. My brother was still holding the envelope. The deed. His name printed clearly across the top. The graduation banner fluttered behind him in the warm afternoon breeze. The smell of grilled food hung heavy in the air. Our relatives stared at me like I had committed a social crime. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just stood there beside the cake that read, "Congratulations, Daniel." And I watched my father realize this wasn't about my sister. It never had been. The first time I noticed the difference between us, I was 12. It wasn't dramatic. It's no shouting, no clear moment, just small things. My sister Alina got piano lessons. I got told we couldn't afford art supplies. She got a new laptop before high school. I used the family desktop in the hallway where everyone could see my screen. Alina has potential, my mother used to say. She just needs support. And what did I need? Discipline, apparently. I learned early that praise in our house moved in one direction. Alina's report cards were framed. Mine were folded and placed in drawers. If I got a scholarship, it was expected. If she passed a test, it was celebrated. I didn't resent her at first. She was younger, bright, charming, the kind of child who laughed easily and cried loudly. People leaned toward her. I leaned away. By the time I was 23, I had a steady job and a small apartment. I worked long hours, saved carefully, built something stable. When I bought my first car without help, my father said, "Good, that means you won't need us." It sounded like approval, but it felt like distance. Alina, meanwhile, changed majors twice, dropped a semester, then another. Each time my parents said she was finding herself. When tuition deadlines approached, they called me. "Just until things settle," my mother would say. I transferred money without argument. I told myself it was temporary, that families support each other. But I noticed something. No one ever asked what I was postponing. When I delayed a home down payment to help cover her fees, no one said thank you. When I skipped a vacation because I'd wired money the week before, no one asked if I was tired. Have you ever been the dependable one in a family that only notices you when they need you? By 32, my savings account was healthy. My business was stable. I had built my life quietly without borrowing from anyone. That's when the conversations shifted. It wasn't about, "Can you help?" anymore. It became, "When you help." My father once joked at dinner, "At least one of our daughters knows how to earn. That's security for all of us." Everyone laughed. I smiled too, but something about the way he said, "for all of us," stayed with me. Security. It wasn't praise, it was planning. Meanwhile, my brother Daniel moved through the house like a shadow, the middle child, quiet, smart, overlooked. He studied late at the kitchen table while Alina practiced speeches about her future ambitions. No one framed his certificates. No one called him potential. When he got into a solid state university on partial scholarship, my mother sighed. "Well, at least it's affordable," she said. Affordable. As if that was the highest compliment he deserved. I remember watching him pack for college with secondhand luggage while Alina had custom dorm decor. Something shifted in me that day. Not anger, recognition. The pattern wasn't accidental. It was structural. And for the first time, I started asking myself a quiet question. If they already decided who mattered most, what would happen if I stopped playing along? Daniel never asked for anything. That's what made it harder to watch. During his second year of college, he started working evenings at a grocery store near campus. Not because he had to. My parents still paid part of his tuition. But because he didn't want to add pressure. That was the word he used when he called me one night. "I don't want to add pressure at home," he said quietly. "Alina's semester costs more this year." I was sitting on my couch, laptop open, reviewing a contract worth more than my parents' annual income. Pressure. It always seemed to land on the wrong shoulders. A month later, I visited home for dinner. Alina was talking about studying abroad. It'll look amazing on my resume, she said, pushing her hair back confidently. Dad says we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. My father nodded, already calculating something in his head. I waited. No one asked how Daniel was managing. No one mentioned that he'd sent half his paycheck home to help with utilities. I brought it up gently. Daniel's working a lot, I said. Maybe we should ease up on him. My mother waved her hand dismissively. He's fine. He doesn't have Alina's expenses. Alina's expenses, the phrase echoed. That night, as I helped clear the dishes, my father followed me into the kitchen. You know, he said casually, once your investments mature, we should think long-term. Maybe set something aside officially for Alina's graduate school. Officially? Set aside. I turned slowly, drying my hands on a towel. And Daniel? I asked. He frowned like I had misunderstood. Daniel will manage, he said. He's practical. Practical. It was always the quiet ones who were expected to endure. Have you ever noticed how families sometimes confuse silence with strength? The warning signs were small, almost polite. My mother started asking about my portfolio more often. But my father once joked, if anything ever happened to you, we'd have to manage things carefully. Too much money overwhelms young people. Young people. I was 34. I laughed it off at the time, but something about the way he said manage things felt rehearsed. A few weeks later, Alina posted online about her future fund. The caption read, "Blessed to have parents who believe in my dreams." I stared at it longer than I should have, because I knew where that belief came from. It came from expectation, not theirs, mine. I had become the silent extension of their plan. Earn quietly, transfer quietly, approve quietly. And when Daniel mentioned, almost apologetically, that he was thinking about renting a small apartment after graduation because he didn't want to burden anyone, something inside me shifted again. Why was the only child who never demanded anything, the one preparing to take the least? That was the night I opened a new savings account. Not for Alina, not for my parents, for Daniel. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, because I wanted to see something first. If I stopped volunteering information, would they notice, or had they already decided where my money belonged? The pattern became undeniable the winter Daniel graduated. It wasn't one big moment. It was a series of small confirmations. My mother called me 3 weeks before the ceremony. "We need to discuss tuition," she said immediately. No greeting, no small talk. "For who?" I asked, though I already knew. "For Alina's graduate program. The deposit is due soon." Daniel's graduation invitations were sitting unopened on my kitchen counter. "And Daniel?" I asked carefully. "He'll be fine," she replied. "He's already looking at jobs." Looking at jobs, as if that was the final goal. I could hear Alina laughing in the background, talking about campus housing for her next degree. My mother lowered her voice. "You've done well for yourself," she added. "It's only fair you support the one with the most potential." Most potential. I stood there in my quiet apartment, sunlight falling across the floor, and something settled in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Later that week, my father sent me a spreadsheet, a literal spreadsheet, projected tuition costs, living expenses, expected family contribution. My name filled the largest column. No one had asked. They had assigned. I scrolled through it slowly. At the bottom was a note. "Daniel will manage independently. Independently." I stared at that word longer than I should have. When I visited home the weekend before graduation, I watched the dynamics closely. Alina dominated the conversation, talking about her future plans. My parents nodded proudly. Daniel sat beside me at the edge of the couch, listening more than speaking. When he mentioned a job interview, my mother changed the subject to housing near Alina's campus. Have you ever sat in a room and realized someone's effort is invisible simply because it's quiet? That night, I stayed late helping Daniel pack up his old room. Most of his things were secondhand, carefully folded, organized. He found an old envelope in his desk drawer and laughed softly. "Remember when I almost didn't apply to college?" he said. Dad said it might not be worth the cost. I didn't remember, because no one had told me. You applied anyway, I said. He shrugged. I figured I'd work it out. Work it out. He always did. Driving home that night, I replayed the spreadsheet in my mind. Projected tuition, expected contribution, manage independently. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was strategic. They weren't asking for help. They were budgeting my future. And that's when I made the final decision. Not out of revenge, not out of resentment, but out of balance. If they believed my success existed to fund one child's dreams, then maybe it was time to redefine what support actually meant. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for Saturday at 3. I had already scheduled something else. The morning of the graduation was warm and bright. The kind of day that looks like celebration from a distance. White folding chairs lined the backyard. My mother had rented them. There were pastel balloons tied to the fence. A long table held trays of food covered in aluminum foil, already sweating under the sun. Alina wore a new dress. Daniel wore his old suit. I noticed that immediately. He stood near the grill with a paper plate in his hand, nodding politely as relatives congratulated him. His smile was soft, earned. My father walked around making small announcements. Daniel's degree will help him get started, he said to an aunt. But of course, we're focusing on Alina's next step now. Focusing. Like Daniel's achievement was already in the past. I moved through the crowd quietly, hugged cousins, thanked people for coming. I carried a small white envelope in my purse, more heavier than it looked. Inside, it was not a check. It was a deed. 3 months earlier, I had met with a realtor. Not flashy, not extravagant. A modest 2-bedroom home in a safe neighborhood near Daniel's future workplace, paid in full. The closing paperwork had felt surreal, signing my name not as a safety net, but as a choice. Have you ever done something quietly and waited for the right moment to let it breathe? By mid-afternoon, it was time for speeches. My mother spoke first. She praised Daniel's persistence, but quickly shifted toward how the family had sacrificed so much. My father followed. He thanked everyone for supporting our children's education, emphasizing the plural. Then he handed the microphone to me. I hadn't expected that. For a second, the backyard felt smaller. The hum of conversation died down. I could hear the wind brushing against the balloons. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed faintly. I walked forward slowly. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at Daniel. I know what it's like, I began calmly, to work quietly and not expect applause. A few people shifted in their seats. You've never asked for more than you needed, I continued, and you've never made your dreams someone else's burden. Daniel's expression changed slightly, confused, curious. I reached into my purse and took out the envelope. This is for you, I said. He opened it slowly. The paper made a soft sound as it unfolded. I watched his eyes scan the page, then freeze. Is this, he started. Yes, I said simply. It's yours. A house, fully paid, no loan, no co-signing, just his name. For a second, no one reacted. Then the murmurs began. My mother stood abruptly. My father stepped forward, and that's when his voice cut through the applause. That money was for her tuition. Not angry, not loud, just stunned, like I had violated an unspoken contract. I didn't turn toward him. I didn't explain, because for the first time I wasn't trying to justify how I chose to use what I earned. I simply stood beside my brother, who was still holding the deed with both hands. And I waited. The backyard didn't erupt. It tightened, like air being pulled out of a room. My father stepped closer, his jaw stiff but voice controlled. That money was for her tuition, he repeated, as if saying it twice would turn it into truth. Alina stood behind him, eyes wide, not hurt, shocked, because no one had told her the fund might not exist. I felt dozens of eyes on me, relatives, neighbors, even Daniel's college friends who had no context for this tension. I kept my voice even. What money? I asked quietly. My father blinked. The money you've been saving, the long-term plan, he said. We discussed this. Discussed. We had never discussed transferring ownership of my income. We had assumed. I don't remember agreeing to allocate my earnings for anyone else's future, I replied. My mother stepped forward now. This is embarrassing, she whispered sharply. You're making it look like we favor one child over the other. I held her gaze. Do you? I asked softly. The question hung there longer than any accusation could have. Daniel was still silent, his fingers pressed against the edge of the deed as if it might disappear. Alina finally spoke. So you're just giving him a house? She asked. And what about my tuition? Not angry, just accustomed, as if resources flowed toward her naturally. Have you ever seen expectation exposed in daylight? I took a breath. Daniel has covered his own expenses for years, I said calmly. He never asked me for anything. I chose this. My father shook his head. You're dividing the family, he said. Dividing. The word felt misplaced. Was equality division? Or was it disruption? You built this business with family values, he continued, and now you're using it selfishly. Selfishly. There it was again. The quiet accusation reserved for anyone who redirects control. I didn't raise my voice. I built my business with discipline, I said. Family didn't fund it. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. The grill crackled behind us. A balloon popped softly in the corner of the yard, startling no one. Alina crossed her arms. So I just lose out? She asked. Lose out, as if she had already owned something that was never hers. I looked at her, not unkindly. You don't lose anything that wasn't promised, I said. Silence again. My father's face flushed slightly. You were supposed to help your sister, he said. That was understood. Understood. By who? The part that hurt wasn't the confrontation. It was the assumption. The years of quiet planning. The spreadsheet with my name filling the largest column. The way my success had already been distributed without my consent. Daniel finally spoke. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly. I know, I replied. That was the point. Have you ever realized that generosity feels threatening only to those who planned to control it? My father stepped back, looking around at the watching faces. He didn't shout, he didn't demand, but his disappointment was heavy. This changes things, he said. Maybe it did, because in that moment something invisible shifted, not in the backyard, in the structure of expectation. The party didn't end, it dissolved. Conversations resumed in smaller circles, plates were refilled, laughter returned thinner than before. Daniel stayed close to me, still holding the folder like it anchored him to the ground. I don't know what to say, he whispered. You don't have to say anything, I replied. Across the yard, my parents stood apart from the crowd. My mother's smile was tight, rehearsed. My father kept checking his phone, avoiding eye contact with anyone who approached. For the first time in years, I wasn't scanning their reactions to adjust mine. I wasn't calculating how to smooth it over. I wasn't volunteering reassurance. I walked toward the dessert table and poured myself a glass of water. The ice clinked softly against the cup. The sound felt grounding. Have you ever noticed how quiet your mind becomes once you stop trying to manage everyone else's emotions? Alina didn't come over again. She left early, claiming she had things to plan. My parents stayed until the last guest left, then approached me together. You blindsided us, my mother said, voice low but steady. I made a choice, I replied. You could have talked to us first, my father added. Talked. I thought about the spreadsheet, the projections, the assumption that my future earnings were already allocated. When were you going to talk to me? I asked gently. Neither answered. Daniel hugged them both before they left. I watched the exchange carefully. They congratulated him, but it felt different, measured, reserved. When they drove away, the yard felt quieter than it had all day. Daniel sat on one of the folding chairs, staring at the sky. Are they going to be angry with you? He asked. Maybe, I said honestly. And you're okay with that? I considered the question. For years, I had feared disappointing them more than exhausting myself. Now the fear felt smaller. "I'm okay with being clear," I said. He nodded slowly. "I never wanted to compete," he admitted. "You weren't competing," I replied. "You were surviving." That evening, after the chairs were folded and the banner taken down, I drove home, alone. No calls, no angry texts, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. I hadn't done this to prove a point. I hadn't done it to punish anyone. I had simply redirected something that was already mine. And that redirection felt like freedom. The fallout wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. For a few weeks, my mother's calls became less frequent. My father stopped sending financial articles about family planning. Alina posted less about her future online. No one mentioned the house again. But something had shifted. At the next family dinner, I noticed the change immediately. My father asked Daniel about his new commute. My mother listened without interrupting. Alina spoke about applying for scholarships instead of assuming support. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't warm. But it was different. Have you ever seen respect grow in the space where expectation used to sit? One evening, my father called me alone. "I didn't realize we made you feel obligated," he said carefully. The wording was imperfect, but it was closer to truth than anything I'd heard before. "I wasn't obligated," I replied. "I was willing. There's a difference." Silence stretched between us. Then he said something that surprised me. "We shouldn't have assumed." That was enough. Daniel moved into his house quietly. No grand announcement, no social media reveal, just a key turning in a door that belonged to him. Alina received partial funding from a university grant. She figured it out, and I continued building my business, not as a resource to be allocated, but as a life I owned. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. If this resonates with you, consider liking and sharing your thoughts below. Sometimes the strongest shift isn't loud. It's a boundary drawn calmly. What would you have done? Comment below.